All right, back to business with Frank Gaffney, president of the Center for Secure Policy. SecureFreedom.org and CounterJihad.com are where you can find him. Now, Frank, just give me your 30,000-foot perspective on what took place, first of all, in Helsinki, and then I want to hear about your reaction to all the fallout.
Well, most obviously, Alex, as you know, the focus was on the president's treatment of this question of collusion, specifically that the intelligence agencies of the United States government have been colluding against him, let's say. But it obscured somewhat the more troubling stuff to me, I have to say, which was the uncontested claim by Vladimir Putin that the president had agreed to a whole host of items on what I can only describe as the old Soviet playbook, the agenda of the Kremlin going back to the Cold War. I hope that's not true, but it's been somewhat obscured by the furor over the other, and we need to sort out both. I was pleased to see the president clarifying his comments on the intelligence agencies and all that, but I hope that he will next clarify that there is not any agreement on doing at least what the Russians want to do on, having defensive weapons in space or missile defenses or ignoring their arms control violations and the other substantive things that apparently they talked about at some length in the course of their private meetings, as well as the ones with their aides.
Yeah, so this is the thing that is so farcical about our media, and I do think part of it is coming from a lazy place, Frank. I think a lot of it is maliciousness, but I think a lot of it is just simply lazy. Is they get the low-hanging fruit, they can just announce that they're outraged and then spew conspiracy theories. They don't actually have to go through and think about, well, what is actually the state of play here with Russia? Because I think folks like you and I have probably a pretty nuanced view of Russia's role in geopolitics right now. It actually takes some discipline and some thought to think through where we are with Russia, because most of the time Russia, I think, is an adversary in a handful of issues. I think Russia could potentially be an ally, and it's much more simple to announce Russia as the greatest threat, the greatest enemy to the American people, that President Trump is their puppet, and then to congratulate yourself on social media with another tweet.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, Alex. I think there's no question that the Democrats are calculating that they can try to get to the president's right on national security, specifically with respect to Russia. This happens to play into, as you say, a number of political themes for them, that he colluded on the one hand to steal the election in 2016, that he's the dupe of Putin, or worse, that, as you were indicating before the break, that Putin has got something on him. And this really comes down to what is a feature of totalitarianism. We're familiar with it for many, many years now. It's called the big lie. And what's going on now with this meme? You mentioned Scarborough, you mentioned Pelosi, Schumer.
Sure.
This unfounded charge that the president is somehow being blackmailed by Putin, repeated often enough, uncontested, amplified by the press, is unquestionably going to be taking on the trappings of truth. And it's, as best I can tell, it's not true. It's defamatory and ridiculous, but it will, unfortunately, unless challenged at every turn, take on, in a lot of people's minds, some sense of reality and be very tough to shake.
Yeah. So one thing that you noted was going to the right of the Republicans on Russia. And this is something that I'm increasingly concerned about, Frank. And I think you and I are probably similar in a lot of our foreign policy issues, which we like the idea of America being the top superpower. We're not afraid to bomb some bad guys sometimes. But we've learned a lot of lessons over the past few years that getting into a million different foreign wars without clear vision and without good intelligence is not necessarily a prescription for success in the 21st century right now. And you're looking at these one after the next. We've compiled the story. We'll put it on the front page by Josh Kaplan at Breitbart, where it starts with Chris Cuomo and it goes with columnists at Market Watch, columnists at Huffington Post, columnists at Politico, one after the next, including some military veterans, Senator Richard Blumenthal, all suggesting what Putin did was an act of war. Tom Perez suggested that what Putin did was an act of war. Is it just me, Frank, or is this the type of language that you think in a sane media people would stop and say, wait a minute, this is an implication that we should consider actual military aggression against Russia?
Yeah, I don't think the Democrats have any interest in pursuing that at all. It's just, again, a question of posturing and challenging Donald Trump on what is unmistakably one of his strong suits. I think you contrast, as you've been doing in the course of the show, Alex, the conduct of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and before that, Bill Clinton, and Democrats more generally, particularly congressional Democrats. I think there's not a dime's worth of difference between their views, by and large, and what I'm concerned about, and I think you are too, is Vladimir Putin's agenda. I mean, they would go in a minute in the direction that he wants to take them. So I think this is about trying to pillory the president and rough him up and take away from him one of his strong suits. And I hope the president will let them do it. I think it falls now. He's promising, let's be clear, just in the course of those clarifications that he did yesterday, that big things are coming. Well, if big things are in any way, shape, or form, movement along the lines of what Putin is claiming Trump agreed to and I don't think just talking about some of these things, but I think he was suggesting that somehow there's an agreement that we're going to, for example, ignore the Russian violations of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces agreement or treaty, or a new start, or again prohibit effective defenses against missile attack in space or otherwhere. I mean, this is not Donald Trump's agenda. It's not consistent with America's interests. It does happen to track pretty closely, I'm afraid, though, with the Democrats' view of things, and they ought to be called out on it, not given a pass.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about this, too, because as people who have read Breitbart over the years know, we've been highly critical of Russia, and we do think Russia is a bad actor for the most part, and they need to be dealt with seriously. And I think the president, if he was a Democrat, would have been congratulated for what happened in Helsinki, and not necessarily as a good thing. It's because some of it was we want to have a tough policy with Russia, and we want him to be able to speak clearly when he's on the world stage, which I don't think he did that day. So, Frank, give me in a nutshell. Let's go back in the past a little bit. Between Obama, Hillary, and their foreign policy, the Bush foreign policy, and the Donald Trump foreign policy, who's been the toughest on Russia of that group?
Well, I think by and large, what the president's actually done, as opposed to some of his rhetoric, has been dramatically more robust than what these guys did. To be sure, Obama, late in his term, was sort of pushed into the corner of trying to punish Russia for the invasion of Ukraine, but that came after the reset and Skolkovo. You mentioned Uranium One in the previous segment, but let's not forget Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama engineered the transfer of some of our most sensitive, militarily relevant technologies, including hypersonic missile technology, to Russia in the name of giving them a Silicon Valley. And, oh, by the way, many of those whose technologies were transferred for sale, of course, were big donors to the Clinton Foundation. I mean, this is ripe. We hear John Brennan talking about treason. That was treason, as far as I'm concerned. And by the way, could I just say about John Brennan, he should not be casting the first stone here. This guy voted for communists early in his life. He helped the Muslim Brotherhood when he was the Homeland Security advisor to the president with its penetration of the U.S. government and its influence operations. And then as the CIA director, he was responsible for the rampant politicization of the agency. The president is critical of it, quite understandably, because he did incalculable harm, just as Peter Strzok did to the FBI's reputation, and others in the Department of Justice have done to its. John Brennan, and then there's Jim Clapper, of course, were engaged in the corruption for political purposes of the intelligence community. And I think Donald Trump is getting, frankly, an unfair criticism on a lot of this because it has damaged the confidence not just the president, but the public has, and rightly so, in agencies we need
Frank,
to be
I'm
doing their
right
jobs,
there
just
with
like we
you.
do the FBI.
I'm right there with you. I think Brennan was a disaster policy-wise. But here's one thing:
Absolutely.
If you are a liberal, and if you are a liberal and you're listening to the show, you're also hearing that John Brennan was a failure. Also, he did a bad job.
Right.
So why is the guy who's in charge of even if, Frank, you have the values that we have, if you don't have those values, if you don't even care about the Muslim Brotherhood or about voting for communists, Brennan failed in terms of camping out some of the stuff when he was in charge of it. And now he's the first guy they run to get comment on this?
Yeah. Well, what you're seeing is a kind of unhinged quality to him that evinces deep animosity to the president of the United States. If you don't think he was exhibiting that and acting on it when he was the director of Central Intelligence Agency, you're smoking something. And that's something we need to hold him accountable for.
Frank Gaffney, securefreedom.org, counterjihad.com. Our time always flies by when we're together every week at this time.